This is my latest game, Hyperdrive Havoc. I made it over 2 weeks for a game development tournament that I'm currently competing in. And in this devlog, I'm going to walk you through how I made it. And if you stick around to the end of the video, I'm going to rate myself based on how I think I did. Once the voting is over, we can go back and compare the results and see how I did. The tournament I'm competing in is called GDKO, or Game Dev Knockout. It's a multi-round elimination tournament that's played out over 5 rounds. Each round, a theme is announced and you're given 2 weeks to make a game over that theme. Each developer is allowed to vote on the other entries, and after the voting period, the bottom 25% are eliminated. It's put on every year by fellow YouTuber and my good friend Xanderwood. If this sounds like something you'd like to compete in, well, the 2024 tournament is already underway. But the 2025 tournament page has already been set up, and if you're interested, I'll have a link to that in the description below. This year, the theme for round 1 was Spectacle, but we also had an additional modifier based on a team that we were assigned. I was on Team Endmark, so my modifier was 2-button. I will be the first to admit I had a lot of trouble with this theme and modifier. If you've seen my previous videos, you know I like to have between 20 and 30 ideas, then I narrow them down to make a decision. In this round, I was only able to come up with 9 ideas. After narrowing down all the ideas, my favorite idea was to use the spectacles as 3D glasses. You would use the mouse to switch between the red side and the blue side of the glasses, each side revealing certain colored boxes. You would use the 2 buttons to move left and right to avoid the boxes. Realistically, I felt like there was too much technically that I couldn't get done in 2 weeks. So ultimately, I scrapped that idea for a simpler one. Ultimately, I decided to go with an arcade-style game similar to Space Invaders, but using the modifier, I had 1 button to move the player and another button to shoot. And with that, I was ready to start building my prototype. Quick disclaimer here, I didn't actually remember to record anything while I was building the game. Anything you hear me say is accurate to how I built it. But the visuals you're seeing on screen are added in after the game jam is over. For the initial prototype, I wanted the 2-button modifier to feel as good as possible. As inspiration, I thought back to those old arcade cabinets like Space Invaders and Pac-Man. 1 button was going to be used sort of like the joystick and move the character left and right. The other button you'd have to press rapidly to shoot. My goal here was not to get it perfect. Once it was good enough, I moved on to making basic enemies. At the start, it was only static enemies, and my whole goal was to set up the collisions. I added in multiple power-ups that dropped from the enemies. Each power-up allowed the player to shoot different kind of bullets. Ultimately, I felt like this was too much to add in the 2-week time period, so I scrapped the whole system. Though it is still in the game, maybe I can use it for future rounds. With the basic movement in place and some basic enemies, my next goal was to finish creating the game loop. I added in placeholder scenes for the title, leaderboard, options, credits, and a game over screen, and set up the logic between everything. I took a break from the core game loop to go ahead and set up the online leaderboard. This is something I learned how to do last year, and it was really popular. And it wasn't as hard as I expected, so I just went ahead and knocked it out. And if you're interested in how I did that, I will be putting out a video on online leaderboards specifically for Unity on January 29th. So if you enjoy devlogs like these and you feel like you could get use out of that video, be sure to hit that subscribe button. After finishing the online leaderboard, I got back to the core loop, and the only real piece missing was the enemy movements. And for this, I actually had my son help me. He'd shown interest in game development anytime I do it, so I let him pick the enemy patterns. The green alien, Alan, moves in diagonals and bounces off the edges of the screen. The yellow enemies, Bonbon, moves in a sine wave pattern from left to right and bounces off the corner of the screen. It also shoots the player. And the pink enemy, Lips, moves in a sawtooth pattern. It moves diagonally to a lowest point, then goes straight up to a highest point, and then it repeats the pattern. At this point, I had kind of a dumb mistake. I used Git for version control, and I was working on a different branch. I stashed some changes and then forgot about them. Eventually, this led to a merge conflict with both my scene loader and the font that I was using, and the stupid thing ended up taking me about 4 hours to correct. But we got it taken care of. At this point, the round was about half over. One of the best pieces of advice that I got last year was to stop adding new content at the halfway mark. At that point, your focus should shift from adding new content to polishing the existing content. It's a piece of advice that I've used ever since, and it's done really well for me. The only piece that I was really missing was some sort of wave or spawn system for the enemies. Instead of adding in a wave system, I decided to just add in an infinite spawner. Enemies will start off screen, slowly move onto the screen, then continue on their normal movement pattern. It wasn't the system I originally wanted, but considering the time frame, I think I made the right call, and it still works pretty well. There was still no music or sound effects at this point, so I went ahead and added in placeholders, but I actually enjoyed the placeholders so much, it just stayed as the final music that you hear in the game now. Then I switched my attention to all the polish, those tiny things that just add an extra bit of feel-good to the game, like particle effects, screen shake when the enemies are destroyed, and the score popping up anytime you defeat one. At this point, everything that I wanted in the game was in place, so now it was just going back and identifying those tiny things that I could do to make it feel better. The 2-button modifier really threw me for a loop, but I always like to try to support multiple input types, so I spent time adding support for controller, keyboard, or mouse, however you want to play. I spent a good 2 to 3 hours just redoing a lot of the UI elements. Some of the original typefaces just didn't feel right, and there were a lot of issues with the UI scaling. But once everything was corrected, I was ready for a last round of playtesters. And man, you guys did not disappoint. The final round of playtesters ended up coming up with several bugs that I just missed during the initial phase. So if you were one of these playtesters and you caught something, I really appreciate you taking the time to let me know. You know who you are. The final game looks like this. One thing that I've started doing is evaluating myself at the end of each game jam. I found that it helps me become a little bit more mindful of the judging criteria and have more intentionality in my games. So, how do I feel like I did? The judging criteria for this round were: how cohesive is the game art? Do all the visual elements work well together? Do the animations and effects improve the player experience or game juice? Is the art appealing, or do you want to spend more time in this world? Did you enjoy this entry? And how well was the theme implemented? I do feel like my visual elements work well together and are quite cohesive, primarily because I used only 2 asset packs. So for that category, I'm going to rate myself a 4. Do the animations and effects improve the player experience? Again, I'm going to say yes, because the animations were included in the asset pack, and I really focused on adding in those polish elements like particle effects and screen shake. And for this, I'm going to give myself another 4. Is the art appealing, or do you want to spend more time in this world? Yes. I thought the asset pack was really cute, and that's part of the reason why I chose it. So for that, I'm also going to give myself a 4. Did you enjoy this entry? I felt like this was one of my most polished games yet, and I really did enjoy playing through it. It felt solid, so for that, I'm also going to give myself a 4. How well was the theme implemented? I will be the first to admit that this was not the area I focused my attention in. I think I nailed the 2-button modifier, but there's not really anything about this that screams spectacle. So for this one, I'm going to give myself a 2. Overall, that means I rank myself at an average score of 3.6, which actually is lower than my entry last year. And I do feel like this year's entry is substantially better than that one. Last year, I ranked 41st. So my prediction this year is that I'm going to end up in 22nd place. I do feel like it should be a little bit higher, but having played through some of the games from this year, there are some monster newcomers. And that's the breakdown of how I made my entry for GDKO Round 1. I hope you got some useful info about what you can do in the future or what not to do. Do you agree with my assessment of my own game? Did you learn something that other people could benefit from? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. If you'd like to play my game and see if you can get on my leaderboard, I'll have a link to it in the description. If you want to see some of the other great games that were made during this game jam, I did a live stream showcasing a lot of them that I'll have here. And if you'd like to see my step-by-step process for how I go about game jams, I'll have that one over here. Take care, and I'll see you next time.